The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio. Please be advised.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight, on The Fire You Can't Put Out, the royal baby was born, but I don't care. Carlos Danger, Steve King, and Cantalopes. The passing of a journalistic icon, no more oral sex for you, and that lie that you want to believe is going to begin to cost you. Good day, everybody. My name is Melvin. This is The Fire You Can't Put Out. Before I begin, I just want to say a quick shout out to my friends Angela and Kevin and Leo. We will all get back on this mic before you know it. But I'm very pleased to be here with you again for another fiery episode. Today is July 24th. I generally do, and it's a Wednesday, I generally do this show on Thursday or Friday and get it out by the weekend. But this week has been particularly huge for news. Plus, the president gave a major speech today. I won't be covering that speech tonight. I will, however, be covering it next week, because here's the thing. I got to listen to it today, but I want to read over the transcript and get a little bit better of an idea before I speak out about it. But there is so much news today, or this week so far, I want to get into it now, and then whatever comes after today we'll put on next week's show, obviously. So, I want to begin with Detroit. This past week, Detroit filed for bankruptcy. There was a time where Detroit was just the American city. It had a huge auto economy, plenty of work, but over the last number of decades, the city has fallen deeper and deeper into poverty. And last year, Michigan became a right-to-work state, or as we who are being fair like to call it, a right-to-work-for-less state. Earlier this year, the governor put in an emergency manager law, and if you know anything about emergency managers, they are the most anti-democratic thing that any governor can do. Whenever an emergency manager is appointed, that means that all local government, all government directly connected to you, the people, does not matter anymore. Only what that emergency manager does and says matters. So, when the governor put an emergency manager, and of course he's a Republican, and he's going to put in another Republican, then that's it. What's unfortunately probably going to happen with the debate over Detroit is exactly that. No debate. There was a great article by Paul Krugman, wrote this week, where he said we must not fall into the trap of comparing it to Greece. Because first of all, Greece and Detroit are nothing alike. Okay, Greece's problems were because Greece had a lot of debt. Goldman Sachs helped them hide that debt so that they could become a part of the European Union. After they became a part of the European Union, Goldman Sachs called in that debt. And they've been practicing austerity ever since, and it's leading to the collapse of their economy. That's not what happened here. For years, Detroit has been underfunded. Detroit has also been, the state of Michigan has also been gerrymandered. Despite the fact that in the last election, Democrats got 250,000 more votes than did Republicans, the House of Representatives for Michigan goes like this: 9 Republicans, 5 Democrats. And Republicans have no problem cutting taxes to the bone. If you want to read the Krugman article, it is over at the New York Times website, and I suggest you do. I want to read one quick thing from it. A quote from Krugman. Are Detroit's woes the leading edge of a national public pensions crisis? No. State and local pensions are indeed underfunded, with experts at Boston College putting the total shortfall at $1 trillion, but many governments are taking steps to address the shortfall. These steps aren't yet sufficient. The Boston College estimates that overall pension contributions this year will be about $25 billion less than they should be. But in a $16 trillion economy, that's just not a big deal. And even if you make more pessimistic assumptions, as some but not all accountants say you should, It still isn't a big deal. There's another thing here that I think is missing from the discussion that must be pointed out. And that is how many manufacturing jobs this country has lost. Under Bush alone, we lost over 150,000 manufacturing facilities. That's the facilities themselves. And that's not one facility, one job. That's one facility and many jobs. Our insane trade policies, which, by the way, lead us at not only an economic disadvantage, but also at a security disadvantage. Do you know that most of the missiles that we make, the bombs that we use in war, we cannot make without parts from China? Think about that. Not that China's planning a war with us, but if they wanted to, they certainly have us by the short hairs. Detroit is expected to only be the first of many American cities that this is going to happen to. Detroit isn't the only underfunded city. It's just the one that's on the front page right now. And over the next number of weeks and months, obviously, we'll pay attention to this and bring you updates as they come in. And the next time this happens to a city, be ready first to hear the right wing scream about how this is Democrats running everything. No. Democrats want to fund government. Democrats want to bring jobs back. The Republicans are the only people that are saying kill government, which, by the way, is only your voice. Let's move on to New York, which unfortunately has become a bit of a laughingstock. Now, you may remember Eliot Spitzer had to step down a while back when it was found out that he was messing around with prostitutes. Well, Spitzer's back, and he's running for comptroller, and they've not let him forgotten about his indiscretions. He has, however, been forthcoming with his indiscretions, said he regrets what has happened in the past, and says he's a different man. Let's move over to Carlos Danger. Let's move over to Anthony Weiner. Now, you may remember Anthony Weiner had to step down from being a congressman because he was sending inappropriate photos of himself over the internet. That was 2 years ago that happened. And he was forced to step down because of it. Embarrassed himself and his pregnant wife at the time. Well, there's a new wrinkle in the story, so to speak. He's now running for mayor of New York City. And as mayor of New York City, well, anytime you run for public office, a few things are going to come out. And it came out yesterday from a website called thedirty.com that he has been sending, even as recently as last summer. No lie, last summer, a full year after he was forced out of office for doing the same thing. He was once again sending pictures of his pickle to perplexed young women. I tried to keep with the P's there, but I couldn't think of a P for ladies. And he was going under the handle Carlos Danger. To be quite honest, when it comes to sex, the personal lives of politicians, actors, actresses, musicians, I don't care. If you're a singer, I care about your music. You're an actor or actress, I care about your damn movies. I don't care about your personal lives. My thinking is the same with politicians. If you're a good politician, and in my mind, Anthony Weiner, unfortunately titled at this moment, but that is the man's name, I don't really care about his personal life either. However, doing this again, after he was forced to step down because he did this kind of thing, even though I still don't care about his personal life, and I believe that this is something that him and his wife are going to have to work out, I don't think he should run for mayor anymore. Now, it's not as though I think as mayor, he's not going to be effective, or no one's going to take him seriously, or he's not going to be a good progressive. I'm sure he would. But he's got a little problem. Sending pictures of him, I'm not a largely public person. I'm a public person. I do a lot of public things. I put myself on stage and in front of microphones whenever I can. But I would never do that. But I guess it takes a certain type of person to do that. Well, I believe that he should not get the nomination from the Democratic Party. I don't think he'll be effective because he seems to have a problem. You know, he could have used Snapchat. Most of you probably don't know what Snapchat is, but if you really want to send naughty photos of yourself, there's a thing called Snapchat which causes the message to self-destruct after about 10 to 12 seconds. Of course, there are now apps you can download so you can save pictures from Snapchat. But I think the best thing would have been to not do this again. His poor, humiliated wife had to stand on stage in the beginning and say, hey, I'm going to stick by my man. And I ache for her. I ache for her child. And I ache for what would happen to not only New York City, but to the Democratic Party if the unfortunately named Wiener became their new mayor. Carlos Danger, I think it's time you get out of the race. Save us all a lot of trouble. Most of the world, certainly all of us here in America, are still reeling from the Zimmerman verdict, believing, rightfully so, that Zimmerman is a murderer and a crook. So, this comes to us this week. An Ohio Political Action Committee is raising money to buy George Zimmerman a new gun. You heard that right. The Ohio PAC group announced from their website that they're called the Buckeye Firearms Foundation, and they want to provide him with a gun, a holster, a flashlight, and any other gear that he may have lost after murdering Trayvon Martin. The pro-gun group takes issue with the Department of Justice decision to put a hold on all evidence in the Zimmerman case, including the gun he used to kill Trayvon Martin, until it determines whether or not Zimmerman violated Martin's civil rights. While Zimmerman, who was acquitted of murder charges, is permitted to purchase a new gun, the group expressed concern on its website that the Justice Department is attacking all gun owners. And I quote, "This is outrageous that Attorney General Eric Holder is the nation's chief law enforcement officer. It's his job to uphold the laws and support and defend our system of justice. The move to prevent Mr. Zimmerman from claiming his property is an unacceptable abuse of power, and the threads of federal charges on civil rights grounds is little more than blatant pandering for political gain." Here's the thing. George Zimmerman murdered an unarmed black teenager, approached him, they squabbled, and he killed him. He went to trial, he was acquitted, and this pro-gun group, or they like to call themselves a pro-gun rights group, it's awful cute, you guys. Let's call you what you are. Pro-murder. This pro-murder group said, hey, George Zimmerman, we heard that you cannot get the gun back you used to kill Trayvon Martin. We wish to purchase you another gun, a flashlight, a holster, and whatever the hell else it takes in order for you to get back out there and start killing more unarmed black teenagers again. To stand up in one instance and say, hey, we are pro-Second Amendment. We believe in the right to bear arms. That's one thing. Okay? You could simply say what happened between Zimmerman and Trayvon was absolutely awful, atrocious, tragic, and all the rest. You could simply say that. But instead what they've chosen to say is the murder was justified, and not only was it justified, when can you do it again, Mr. Zimmerman? Maybe we'll get you as many guns as you need. On the one hand, they could have taken that first position and said, hey, this is a terrible thing. We really should mourn whenever our nation's children are murdered. But they've doubled down on their hardcore position. And that's unfortunate. And they're doing it partially, their explanation is that Eric Holder, because the Justice Department wants to look into the Zimmerman case, they put a hold on all of the evidence from the trial. They're afraid that this is Obama's way of coming after guns. They're obviously dead wrong, and they're paranoid. But I guess if all you really care about is murder, and you can't convince me otherwise. Even if I'm not against guns. I've shot guns. I think shooting a gun is fun. Target practice is fun. I will never own a gun, And I will certainly never own a gun when I have children in my house, because I believe that that is wildly irresponsible. Unless you are a law enforcement officer, I don't think it's responsible for you to own a gun in a home with children. There are news stories every day about children being accidentally shot. The accident was bringing it into your house. What happened wasn't an accident. What happened was what you should have fully expected. One of your kids found the gun and shot himself or his brother and sister or you, mom and dad. It's time to rethink our relationship with guns. Stop celebrating the slaughter of our nation's children. Afraid that they might not be perceived as useless, John Boehner, the weeping Cheeto, spoke up this week and says that Congress ought to be judged on how many laws they repeal. He made the comments on Sunday on CBS Face the Nation and was responding to a question about how little Congress is doing these days. Boehner says Congress should not be judged by how many new laws they create. However, they should be judged by how many they repeal. Then he went on to say the U.S. has more laws than the administration could ever enforce. I wonder if he realizes that he is a lawmaker. But here's the thing. Not only is he dead wrong, and he probably doesn't realize he's a lawmaker, but Congress has created 15 laws, most of them inconsequential, and repealed none. So no matter how you judge Congress, you come up dead last, Mr. Boehner. So he thinks that less laws are the best idea for our nation. Well, if you think so, deregulation and all the rest, this comes to us this week. If you want a clear example of how Wall Street is making income inequality worse, stop and think about the cost of your next can of Diet Coke or Bud Light. The New York Times reported this week, following up on a Reuters report from more than a year ago, that Goldman Sachs and other banks are making millions of dollars simply by moving aluminum around in warehouses for no apparent reason. This pointedly busy work has raised the cost of aluminum that goes into Coke cans, cars, and house siding, costing the economy $5 billion in the past 3 years, according to various estimates. Now, that's not very much money in the grand scheme of things, as Fortune Stephen Gatto points out, and quirky commodities regulations may be at least as much to blame for this goofball state of affairs as are the banks and their relentless blood funnel jamming. But those caveats are beside the point. The point is that this aluminum juggling is just a plain example of what economists call rent-seeking. As you'll find, rent-seeking is the fine art of milking money from a market while not actually creating any new wealth or anything of value in the economy. In fact, it is an economic detriment, as the New York Times points out. Wall Street's rent-seeking means consumers pay more every time they fill up at the gas tank, flip on a light switch, open a beer, or buy a cell phone. The other reason to care about rent-seeking has broader economic effects, one of which is widening the gap between the haves and have-nots. As the Economic Policy Institute, a liberal think tank, pointed out recently, the soaring pay of bankers and CEOs has driven most of the rise in income inequality in past decades. There's a lot of what they call high-frequency trading on Wall Street, which is where they're not actually taking possession of the commodities that they're trading, and nor do they ever plan to. And they have computers trading stocks at a rate of like 10,000 per second. They get it, it goes up a penny, they sell it. Okay? But what's a penny? Well, it's not much for a trade, but you do that 10,000 times an hour or whatever the rate is, and that money adds up. Now, Wall Street isn't adding anything to the economy. They're certainly not adding jobs. They're just skimming a little money off the top. This thing that they're doing with the aluminum, it's the same thing. They're just moving things around, finding ways to make it cost more money, and then they skim a little off the top. You don't go to the store and see the price of your soda going up necessarily, because if it went up too much, you would say, well, son of a bee's hive. Look how much it's gone up. My goodness, what's going on? We're going to stop buying it. Or however you respond to those type of things. Now, It's always been said that Wall Street and all these bankers are creating jobs. Well, that's not exactly what's happening. Defenders of the 1%, such as Harvard economist and former economic advisor George W. Bush and Mitt Romney, are saying that they are rich because of the value that they add to society. Dead wrong. By doing this, they're not adding any value to society. They're skimming a little off the top. They're getting richer. And by the way, you're not getting anything. But you know what might save us all? Is if our society got rid of oral sex. Now, just follow me here for a minute. Now, I know it sounds nuts, but I don't know. Maybe the Cooch has a point. Stick with me. This is a story from back in something that happened back in 2005. A court has denied Virginia Attorney General and 2013 gubernatorial candidate Ken Cuccinelli a full hearing to challenge a ruling that would strike down the state's anti-sodomy statute as unconstitutional. The court issued a short 2-sentence statement on Monday denying the petition filed on March 26 for an en banc hearing. The court noted that no judge requested the full hearing in front of 15 judges after a 3-judge panel ruled the statute unconstitutional on March 12. The statute is a blow for state attorney general and steadfast social conservative who's running in an increasing liberal state. The particular case here is challenging a law that concerned William Scott Donald, a 47-year-old who was convicted under the Crimes Against Nature statute in 2005 for soliciting a 17-year-old girl to commit sodomy. Historically, anti-sodomy laws have targeted homosexual activity, but the laws have been used to outlaw acts as those between the opposite sex as well. Here's the thing. This is Ken Cuccinelli, who is the state attorney general for Virginia and wants to become the new governor. And he's probably gonna get it maybe even sooner than he thinks, because their current governor, Bob McDonnell, is deeply embroiled in a bribery scandal. Okay? So Ken Cuccinelli, or the Cooch as he likes to be called, wants to pass what's called the Crimes Against Nature law, and it would ban all forms of oral sex and sex with animals and any sex that does not lead to procreation. So you might say, well, is he just going to go kick in people's doors? And if he sees someone getting oral sex, are they going to be arrested? Trust me, ladies and gentlemen, his problem is not heterosexual sex. But if the Crimes Against Nature law became law, and he were somehow able to say, you two guys who are in an intimate relationship, I'm pretty certain that you're not having a form of sex that leads to procreation. See, it would make oral sex, which, sex with an animal or any sex that does not lead to procreation, a felony. We have a lot of real problems right now. And trying to ban the BJ isn't going to do anybody any good. This is really nothing more than a homophobic move on his part. All of the people barking their lungs out about being a small government conservative cannot wait to tell you what to do with your womb, what to do with your unborn baby. They can't wait to tell you who you can love, when you can love them, or if you can love them. And they cannot wait to kick in your door, I'm being facetious now, and to tell you that what you're doing is a felony. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you the Cooch and his band of small government conservatives. Conservatives so small, they fit not just in your mouth, or your backside, or your womb, but anywhere in your life where you do not want them. Sometimes it's sometimes it's hard to take some of the stuff seriously. It's hard to understand how these people wind up in positions of power. What does it take for someone to vote for these people? My understanding, with respect to conservatives, is they want to vote for somebody who's promising to shrink the government, promising to let free markets reign, or whatever. And instead, what we get is Michelle Bachmann. Instead, what we get is Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and Eric Cantor. Instead, what we get is anybody who says, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan. The Washington, D.C. airport, well, it used to have a much different name. I believe it was D.C. International. And now, thanks to what is called the Reagan Legacy Project, now it is called the Ronald Reagan International Airport. I've only been to D.C. once. I went there in March 2012 for the Reason rally. And my mind was blown when I looked at my ticket. I'm not a fan of Ronald Reagan. I've never been a fan of Ronald Reagan. And there's a very good reason why. That was encapsulated this week thanks to a story that comes to us courtesy of the Examiner. If you've only listened to conservatives, you would think that Jesus Christ was the only person above Reagan on the totem pole of conservative love. They talk about his love of low taxes, less government, and conservative family values. The problem is that when you step out of the conservative dream and come back to reality, you find that not only was Ronald Reagan a bad president, but he was one of the worst we've seen in modern history. Let me give you 8 subtle examples. Ronald Reagan cut taxes for the rich and increased them on the middle class. When Reagan came into office in January of 81, the top tax rate was 70%. But when he left office in 89, the top tax rate was cut to 28%. As Reagan gave the breaks to all of his rich friends, there was a lack of revenue coming into the federal government. In order to bring money back into the government, Reagan was forced to raise taxes 11 times throughout his time in office. One example was when he signed the law, the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982. I probably should have practiced that one first. Reagan raised taxes 7 of the 8 years he was in office, and the tax increases were felt hardest by the lower and middle class. Tripling the national debt. As Reagan cut taxes for the wealthy, the government was left with less money to spend. When Reagan came into office, the national debt was about $900 billion. By the time he left, the national debt had tripled to $2.8 trillion. Iran-Contra. In 1986, a group of Americans were being held hostage by a terrorist group with ties to Iran. In an attempt to free the hostages, Ronald Reagan secretly sold arms and money to Iran. Much of the money that was received from the trade went to the Nicaraguan Contra rebels who were in war with the Sandinista government of Nicaragua. When the scandal broke in the United States, it became the biggest story in the country, and Reagan tried to downplay what happened, but never fully recovered. Reagan funded terrorists. You're going to love this. Your Saint Reagan? Well, he even had a hand in 9/11. The attacks of 9/11 by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden brought new attention to international terrorism. All of a sudden, Americans coast to coast wore their American flag pins, ate their freedom fries, and couldn't wait to go to war with anybody who looked like a Muslim. What Americans didn't realize is that the same group that attacked the United States on 9/11 was funneled by Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. Prepping for a possible war with the Soviet Union, Ronald Reagan spent billions of dollars funding the Islamist Mujahideen freedom fighters of Afghanistan. With billions of American dollars, weapons and training coming their way, the Taliban and Osama bin Laden took everything they were given and gave it back to the United States over a decade later in the worst possible way imaginable. He funded this terrorist group who he wanted to go to war with Russia. Okay? They did what he wanted to, but because they were, it's sort of like you give them our training, you don't get to be surprised when they turn around and use it on us. So they took our weapons, they took our training, they did the dirty work that Ronald Reagan wanted them to do, and then they came back on 9/11 and knocked down the Twin Towers. Unemployment issues. When Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, unemployment was at 7.5%. After Reagan cut taxes for the wealthy, he began raising taxes on the middle and lower class. Corporations started to ship more jobs out of the United States while hiring cheap foreign labor in order to make a bigger profit. While corporations made billions, Americans across the country lost their jobs. As 1982 came to a close, unemployment was nearly 11%. Unemployment began to drop as the years went on, but the jobs that were created were low paying and barely helped people make ends meet. The middle and lower class had their wages nearly frozen as top earners saw dramatic increases in salary. Ignoring AIDS. By the time the 1980s came around, AIDS had become one of the most frightening things to happen to the country in recent memory. No one understood what AIDS and HIV really was, and when people don't understand something, well, they become scared of it. The fear of the unknown was sweeping across the country, and Americans needed a leader to speak out about this needed a leader to speak out about this horrible virus. But that never happened. Instead of grabbing the bull by the horns and taking charge, Ronald Reagan kept quiet. Reagan couldn't say the words AIDS or HIV until 7 years into his presidency. Not much of a leader. We're in the middle of an immigration debate, a very, very hot immigration debate. And I'll get to a little bit of that in a minute. And with that, I give you number 7. Ronald Reagan gave amnesty to 3 million undocumented immigrants. Let me step away from this for a minute. What's going on right now with the dreamers? The people who live here in America, who've been here their entire lives, but are not legal, and most of them don't even find out that they're not legal until they try to get a driver's license or try to enroll for college, where they've lived in America their whole lives and they don't know anything but America. The conservatives right now want to ship these people back to Mexico, really just for something to put in front of their just to give to their base as red meat. Because they like the fact that they're here because they want these low-wage workers. They want people working off the books. And they're saying that the DREAM Act and what Obama's trying to do to help immigrants is amnesty. Far from it. It moves them to the back of the line and says that you have to earn your citizenship. Well, not Ronald Reagan. In today's GOP, the idea of any immigrant staying in the United States, whether legal or illegal, isn't something that conservatives embrace. What might shock them is that in 1982, Ronald Reagan gave nearly 3 million undocumented workers amnesty. The biggest reason for undocumented workers coming to the United States is because corporations hire them at a cheaper rate than they would an American citizen. All the laws that would have cracked down on companies who hire undocumented workers were, of course, removed from the bill. So, the idea is this. And by the way, say, well, we get those cheap workers here. That must mean we're getting cheaper products. Cheaper labor. We're getting cheaper produce, cheaper products that they produce. No, that's not what's happening. You and I are still paying the same thing as we would if they were paid a fair and equitable wage. But the people, the CEOs, the guys that own the factories, all that money shifts to the top. It's called Reaganomics. And last but not least, his attack on the middle class and unions. The Republican war on unions and the middle class has been heating up in states like Wisconsin and Ohio, but it has been going on for a long time. Unions are formed to give a united voice to the workers in an attempt to create fairness between corporations and their employees. It is that simple. On August 3rd, 1981, PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, went on strike in an effort to get better pay and safer working conditions. Two days later, taking the side of business, Ronald Reagan fired 11,345 workers for not returning to work. If you're a union worker, you get a better wage. You get better benefits. It's just that simple. Unions are not horrible, evil things, as you would be led to believe. It is simply solidarity. It is collective bargaining, the collective voices of a workforce coming together to say, we want safe working conditions. We want fair pay. And in exchange, we will give you an honest day's work. Big business then turns around and says, we will pay you what we want if we even pay you. And you will work twice as hard. Ronald Reagan was no saint. And the Reagan love goes on. You can't go to Newsmax or Fox News or a politician's office without seeing the absolute outright love for Reagan. And they'll say, well, he lowered taxes. And there was none of this immigration stuff. Let's not forget that even after he deregulated banks when he came into office, and then there was the savings and loans crash. A lot of people don't remember that. My wife and I have a couple of friends who we love very dearly. And I've never got to visit their house, obviously, but my wife has. And she said in their house, and they're conservative, of course, we won't fault them for that. But in their house, they have a picture of Jesus, which I think is great. I'm not a Christian myself, but I certainly believe in a lot of the ideas that Jesus believed in. And right next to it, a picture of Ronald Reagan. Think about that. Those guys are absolute polar opposites. How can you love them both at the same time? Well, today's GOP has managed to. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And thanks to the Reagan Legacy Project that helped rename the D.C. airport, you're going to see a lot more of this. But just know that whatever they're saying about Reagan, that's patting Reagan on the back, whatever posthumous verbal fellatio they're giving to Reagan is false. I want to get into a couple of weird stories. I just want to throw these out there because I think these are interesting. And then I want to get into my DMs. Hitler Fried Chicken. You can be forgiven if you never heard of it. Hitler Fried Chicken better surrender its logo because the Colonel is ready to fight. Kentucky Fried Chicken told the Huffington Post Friday that it may take legal action against a fried chicken shop named Hitler that sports a storefront emblem very similar to KFC's, only with Adolf Hitler's head replacing Colonel Sanders. We find it extremely distasteful and are considering legal action since it is an infringement on our brand trademark and has nothing to do with us, a spokesman for KFC told the Huffington Post in an email. Hitler, which recently opened in Bangkok, Thailand, first garnered attention after Andrew Spooner, the author of Footprint Thailand Handbook, snapped a photo of the restaurant and tweeted it out in May. Alan Robertson, 43, who lives in Bangkok, told the Daily Mail the chicken was pretty good and said the servers told him the proprietors thought that Hitler was a good image. The restaurant appears to be an outcrop of what CNN recently dubbed Hitler chic, a new trend in which pop culture icons are recreated to resemble the former Nazi leader, who people think did nothing wrong. It doesn't just diminish what Hitler did. It's really a disservice to the people who died in the Holocaust and survivors of the Holocaust. Ugh, it's got to be awful to see. But this isn't the first time that this has happened. Only this time, it's not with Hitler. This comes to us from 2011. A caricature of President Obama is the face behind a Beijing chicken restaurant, the Shanghaiist points out. The New York Post reports that the slogan on the sign featuring Obama's head on Colonel Sanders' body can be translated, "We're so cool, aren't we?" Yeah, that's what the words say. Reverend Al Sharpton told the Post that the sign is insulting, offensive, and plays to racial stereotypes. It's called Obama Fried Chicken. steps in KFC China spokesperson who said the company is not pleased with the Obama fried chicken logo. We're considering legal action as it is a knockoff and has nothing to do with us, and it infringes on our brand trademark, the spokesman said in a statement. We find it distasteful. But the Atlanta Journal-Constitution points out that the KFC China ad also used an Obama lookalike in a television that ran in Hong Kong. KFC, China, Obama fried chicken, punch it into YouTube. I'm not going to play it here. Holy hell. Obama Fried Chicken is not the first poultry restaurant to use Obama's name either. New York Post notes that there is an Obama Fried Chicken in Harlem. Yikes. Using Obama's name or image to push chicken isn't a guaranteed moneymaker. CNN notes that when a German food company tried selling Obama chicken fingers, public outcry caused the company to all test marketing. Now, it's not just unauthorized use. Well, I guess the president's a public figure, so as a public figure, there really is not much of a, they belong to the public, But the Obama fried chicken, they said they were doing it because Obama's cool. Aren't you cool? We're so cool. But they have no idea how racist it is. In Thailand, they don't know what the problem with Hitler is. In Bangkok, they don't get what's wrong with using Obama to sell chicken. Oh, mercy. On to my DMs. Let's start with Steve King. We're going back to immigration. Okay. Republican leaders have now announced disapproval of Representative Steve King, the Republican from Iowa's criticism of young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers. We were talking about this a little bit ago. In an interview with Newsmax, which is a right-wing website, Steve King claimed that the majority of Dreamers are engaged in drug trafficking. For everyone who's a valedictorian, King said there's another 100 out there who weigh 130 pounds and they've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert. Those people would be legalized with the same act. Saying, I'm sure you heard it, if we legalize the Dreamers, we're just legalizing drug traffickers. I don't have a problem with marijuana. I really don't. Eric Cantor spoke out against it. John Boehner spoke out against it. But guess what? When an anti-Dreamer bill came up in the House last year that was written by Steve King, they both voted for it. So, in June, King offered up an amendment that ended policies allowing the Department of Homeland Security to delay deportations of Dreamers who are deemed low priority. When Dreamers stormed King's office to protest his amendment, King angrily tweeted about the incident, and I quote, 20 brazen, self-professed illegal aliens have just invaded my D.C. office. Obama's lawless order gives them de facto immunity from U.S. law. In the past, King has also referred to Dreamers as dogs and other unflattering things. Steve King, you are a dishonorable mention on the show, The Fire You Can't Put Out. Brian Nieves, a Missouri state senator, who was once accused of threatening to kill a political rival's aide, questioned on Monday whether liberalism is a mental disorder. Punch that into a search engine, liberalism, mental disorder, and you'll come up with the very hateful and intolerant Michael Savage. That's what he called his book. Liberalism is a mental disorder. Ugh. State Senate Majority Whip Brian Nieves posed the question on Facebook after a long discussion with commenters who had responded to a photo of a large gun he posted to the site. The Riverfront Times first reported the incident on Monday. And Nieves wrote, I honestly wonder, and I'm being sincere about this, if liberalism is indeed a mental disorder. A person commits a heinous crime, the kind that we hear about in the news, and they are not allowed to be executed, but an innocent baby who's wrapped in the comfort of his mother's womb, having been created by God, can be literally ripped apart, viciously murdered. And this man of God supports it? Wow, unquote. Oh, mercy. Saying, abortion, bad. By the way, that seems to be all Republicans care about. Abortion, bad, right? So, he, I don't even know how he makes the two, but it's just a obviously liberalism not a mental disorder. For you to suggest that everyone who disagrees with me, they're not right in the head. There's just, no. The problem here is you. The problem is that you're reading Michael Savage's book. The problem is that you might even be a little bit racist. So, in 2010, Nieves was accused of assault by Sean Bell, the campaign manager for a candidate whom Nieves defeated in the Republican primary. In a police report, Bell said that he stopped by Nieves' headquarters to congratulate his staff when Nieves grabbed him, took him into a side room, and displayed a gun while threatening to kill him. Nieves' committee chairman said at the time that the two had no physical contact, of course. Nieves denied charges, and the Franklin County prosecutor did not file criminal charges, citing lack of evidence. Brian Nieves, you are just like the rest of the nitwits, racist and hotheads in the GOP, and you are my second dishonorable mention. I'm not a huge sports fan. I am a big fan of soccer. My team is the Portland Timbers. And that's only pretty recent. Before moving out to my neck of the woods, I had never seen a soccer game before. No freaking idea how exciting it was. And a few weeks ago, I just discovered rugby. Now, these are not hot American games. Okay, you're not going to flip on your TV at any time and see these, or see people driving around wearing the jerseys, with the bumper stickers on their car. It's not the NFL, and it's not MLB. But it's popular in certain pockets of the United States. Enough of that. But I found this story, and it just made me laugh. The story's made its rounds this week, but I thought it should make its rounds on this show as well. Judging by his obituary, Scott E. Ensminger would happily spend eternity cheering on the Cleveland Browns. But before he passed away July 4th, the lifelong fan could not resist one shot at the team that had failed to live up to his expectations. In his obituary, published a few weeks ago in the Columbus Dispatch, the 55-year-old hilariously requested 6 Cleveland Browns pallbearers so the Browns could let him down one last time. Ensminger was born in 1958, meaning he was barely 6 years old when the Browns won their most recent championship in 1964. Since then, the team has made it to the playoffs several times, yet a championship eludes them. The championship drought, however, appears to have never sapped Ensminger's support for the team. As an accomplished musician, he is said to have written a song about the Browns every year, then sent it to the team along with advice on how to run the organization. The family requested people paying their respects to Ensminger wear Cleveland Browns clothing in his honor. Oh, Browns, you've even managed to be beaten by the deceased, CBS Sports joked. Something from the lighthearted side. Gonna get slightly heavier for a moment here. Helen Thomas died this week. She was known as the Dean of the White House, and she was 92 years old. The Gridiron Club, the press group that counted Thomas as its first female member, announced the news in an email after saying that she had been sick for a long time. Thomas was the first woman to become a White House correspondent for a wire service and first to join and lead the White House Correspondents Association. She served as White House correspondent for United Press International for 39 years, and then she moved to Hearst, where she became a columnist with increasingly open political views, though she retained her prime spot at White House briefings. Thomas covered every president from Kennedy to Obama. She was the only woman who traveled with Nixon on his trip to China. She was the person who ended every presidential conference by saying, on behalf of her fellow journalists, "Thank you, Mr. President." By the end of her career, her chair in the White House briefing room had been adorned with, as the New York Times wrote, a small plaque with her name. The only seat in the briefing room designated with the name of a person and not a news organization. Thomas became known for her tough, relentless questioning of presidents and press secretaries. It was not an uncommon sight to see a president repeatedly saying, "Helen, Helen, Helen." As she tried to get a word in edgewise, she became a special foe of the Bush administration, whose policies she openly loathed. President Bush famously refused to call on her at press conferences for years at a time, perhaps due to exchanges like this one as described by the AP. In March 2005, she confronted Bush with the preposition that your decision to invade Iraq has caused the death of thousands of Americans and Iraqis, and every justification for the attack proved false. Why did you really go to war? She demanded. When Bush began explaining his rationale, she interjected, they didn't do anything to you or to our country.